competing in a triathlon nearing the swimming portion's end. Exhaustion setting in, the beach tantalizingly close. A commotion behind as other swimmers cried out in terror, turning to see dorsal fins cutting through the waves. The water churned, red as the orcas attacked. Adrenaline surged, but would it be enough to reach shore? Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin the orca attack story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe, click the like button, and leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Now let's move on to the case. The early morning mist clung to the surface of the water as Dr. Emma Foster carefully loaded her equipment into the sleek yellow kayak. The gentle lapping of waves against the rocky shore of Vancouver Island provided a soothing backdrop to her preparations. Emma couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement as she double-checked her waterproof notebook and camera. Today's expedition could provide crucial data for her research on changing orca feeding patterns. All set for another day of whale watching, Dr. Foster? Called out her research assistant, Mike, as he approached with a steaming thermos. Emma smiled, accepting the coffee gratefully. You know me, Mike. I'd rather be out here than anywhere else, and please, it's Emma. We've been working together for months now. Mike chuckled, helping her secure the last of the equipment. Fair enough, just don't forget to check in every hour. The weather report mentioned some potential chop later this afternoon. Will do, Emma replied, taking a long sip of the rich brew. With any luck, I'll spot the J-pod today. Their hunting behaviors have been fascinating lately. As she finished her coffee, Emma's gaze drifted out to the horizon. The vast expanse of the Pacific stretched before her, holding countless secrets beneath its surface. It was that very mystery that had drawn her to marine biology in the first place, and specifically to the study of orcas, the ocean's apex predators. With a final check of her GPS and radio, Emma bid farewell to Mike and pushed off from the shore. The kayak glided smoothly through the calm waters, and she fell into a familiar rhythm with her paddle. The weight of her research equipment was a comforting presence, a reminder of the important work she was doing. As she paddled further from the coastline, Emma's trained eyes scanned the water for any signs of marine life. A group of sea lions lounged on a distant rocky outcropping, their barks carrying faintly across the water. A bald eagle soared overhead, its piercing cry echoing in the crisp morning air. After about an hour of steady progress, Emma paused to make her first check-in call. Base, this is Foster. All clear so far, heading southeast towards Robson Bight. No orca sightings yet, over? Copy that, Foster, came Mike's crackling reply. Keep us posted, over and out. Emma was just about to resume paddling when she noticed a disturbance in the water about half a mile ahead. Her heart quickened as she raised her binoculars, focusing on the area. A tall, black dorsal fin broke the surface, followed by another, and another. Orcas! She breathed, a grin spreading across her face. Quickly, she grabbed her radio again. Base, this is Foster. I've got a visual on what looks like the J-pod, approximately half a mile southeast of my position. I'm going to move in for a closer look. Understood, Foster, Mike responded. Remember to maintain a safe distance. We don't want a repeat of the humpback incident. Emma winced at the memory but nodded to herself. Copy that. I'll be careful. With renewed energy, she began paddling towards the pod. As she drew closer, she could make out at least 5 individuals, their distinctive black and white coloration gleaming in the morning sun. Emma's scientific mind kicked into high gear as she observed their movements, noting the direction they were traveling and any signs of hunting behavior. She was so engrossed in her observations that it took her a moment to realize something was off. The orca's movements had become more erratic and they seemed to be changing course. With a start, Emma realized they were now heading directly towards her. That's unusual, she muttered, reaching for her notebook to jot down this unexpected behavior. But as she looked up again, her blood ran cold. The orcas were approaching much faster than normal, their dorsal fins cutting through the water with alarming speed. Emma's years of experience told her this was not typical orca behavior. Her heart began to race as she fumbled for her radio. Base, this is Foster. The J-pod is exhibiting unusual behavior. They're approaching my position rapidly. I'm going to start moving back towards the shore. She waited for a response, but only static came through. Base, do you copy? Emma tried again, her voice rising with urgency. Still nothing. The orcas were now close enough that Emma could hear their powerful exhalations as they surfaced. She began paddling backwards, trying to put some distance between herself and the approaching pod. But for every stroke she took, the orcas seemed to gain too. Suddenly, the largest orca, likely the matriarch, surged forward, passing directly beneath Emma's kayak. The force of its movement rocked the small vessel violently, nearly capsizing it. Emma gasped, clinging to the sides of the kayak as water sloshed over the edges. "This isn't happening," she whispered, her scientific detachment crumbling in the face of raw fear. The orcas were now circling her kayak, their massive bodies creating waves that threatened to overturn her at any moment. In a desperate move, Emma reached for the emergency flare in her safety kit. With shaking hands, she prepared to fire it, hoping the noise and light might startle the orcas and give her a chance to escape. Just as she was about to launch the flare, the largest orca breached beside her kayak. Time seemed to slow as Emma locked eyes with the massive creature. In that moment, she saw not the gentle intelligence she had always associated with these animals, but something primordial and terrifying. The orca crashed back into the water, the impact sending a massive wave over Emma's kayak. She lost her grip on the flare as she was thrown sideways, plunging into the frigid Pacific waters. The shock of the cold water drove the air from Emma's lungs. She thrashed to the surface, gasping and sputtering. Her heavy research gear weighed her down, making it difficult to stay afloat. Through the water streaming down her face, she could see her kayak floating upside down a few yards away. And all around her, the orcas continued to circle. Emma's mind raced, trying to recall everything she knew about orca behavior. They weren't known to attack humans in the wild. This had to be some kind of mistake. Perhaps they saw her kayak as a threat or competition for food. But as she treaded water, watching the orcas' rhythmic circling, a primal fear took hold. In that moment, she wasn't Dr. Emma Foster, marine biologist and orca expert. She was prey, alone in the vast ocean with Earth's most efficient predators. A dark shape passed beneath her, so close she could have reached out and touched it. Emma suppressed a scream, knowing that any sudden movements might provoke an attack. She needed to get out of the water, to reach some kind of safety. Her eyes darted around, searching for any kind of refuge. In the distance, she spotted a small rocky islet. It wasn't much, but it was her only hope. Taking a deep breath, Emma began to swim towards the island, trying to keep her movements as smooth and non-threatening as possible. The orcas followed, their massive bodies sliding effortlessly through the water on either side of her. With each stroke, Emma expected to feel the horrific pressure of jaws closing around her. The island seemed impossibly far away, and her muscles screamed with the effort of swimming in her waterlogged clothing. Just when she thought she couldn't go on, her feet touched rocky ground. With a final surge of adrenaline, Emma dragged herself onto the small island, collapsing onto the cold stone. For several long moments she lay there, coughing and shivering, scarcely able to believe she had made it. But as her breathing slowly steadied, a new sound reached her ears. The rhythmic exhalation of the orcas, still circling in the waters around her tiny refuge. Emma pushed herself up, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of help. But there was nothing but open water as far as she could see. She was alone, stranded on a rock barely big enough to lie down on, surrounded by a pod of orcas acting unlike anything she had ever encountered in her years of research. As the gravity of her situation sank in, Emma hugged her knees to her chest, her scientific curiosity completely overwhelmed by fear. The sun climbed higher in the sky, promising a long day ahead. And all the while, the orcas continued their patient vigil, waiting for her to make her next move in this deadly game of survival. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the orcas circling her tiny island refuge. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, offering no comfort against the chill that had settled deep in her bones from her unexpected swim. She shivered, her clothes still damp and clinging uncomfortably to her skin. "This isn't happening," she muttered to herself, running a trembling hand through her salt-crusted hair. Orcas don't behave like this. They just don't. Yet the evidence was right before her eyes. The pod, which she now estimated to consist of at least 7 individuals, continued their relentless patrol of the water surrounding her rocky sanctuary. Every few minutes one would spy hop, rising vertically out of the water to fix Emma with an unnervingly intelligent gaze. Emma's scientific mind struggled to make sense of the situation. In all her years of research, she had never encountered or even heard of orcas exhibiting this kind of focused aggression towards humans. It went against everything she thought she knew about these magnificent creatures. A particularly large male surfaced close to the edge of the island, exhaling forcefully. The mist from its blowhole carried on the breeze, and Emma caught the fishy smell of its breath. Under normal circumstances, being this close to a wild orca would have been the thrill of a lifetime. Now it only served to heighten her terror. "Easy there, big guy," she said softly, more to calm herself than the orca. "I'm not a threat to you. I'm just lost." The orca seemed to consider her for a moment before sinking back beneath the waves. Emma let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. As the initial shock of her situation began to wear off, Emma's training kicked in. She needed to assess her resources and figure out a plan for rescue. Patting her pockets, she felt a wave of relief as her fingers closed around her waterproof phone case. With trembling fingers, she pulled out the phone. Please work," she whispered as she pressed the power button. The screen remained dark. No, Emma cried, frantically pressing the button again and again. But it was no use. Whether from water damage or simply a drained battery, the phone was dead. Emma let out a frustrated groan, resisting the urge to hurl the useless device into the sea. She forced herself to think rationally. What else did she have? Her eyes scanned the small island, hoping to spot anything that might have washed up from her kayak. About 10 feet away, caught in a small crevice, she spotted a flash of yellow. Her heart leapt as she recognized a corner of her emergency kit. Moving carefully on the slippery rocks, Emma inched her way towards it. Just as she was about to reach for the kit, a massive shape exploded from the water beside her. Emma screamed, scrambling backwards as one of the larger orcas lunged partially onto the rocks, its jaws snapping shut mere inches from where her hand had been. Emma's back hit a boulder and she pressed herself against it, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. The orca slowly slid back into the water, its dark eye never leaving her face. "Oh God!" Emma gasped, her whole body shaking. "Oh God! Oh God!" It took several minutes for her breathing to slow and her heart to stop racing. The close call had made one thing painfully clear. The orcas were not simply curious. They were actively trying to get to her. As this realization sank in, Emma felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was a marine biologist, an expert on orca behavior. If she couldn't understand or predict what these animals were doing, what hope did she have of surviving this ordeal? The sun had begun its descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. Under different circumstances, it would have been a breathtaking sight. Now it only filled Emma with dread. Night was coming, and with it, new dangers. "Think, Emma, think," she muttered, racking her brain for anything that might help her situation. Her eyes fell on the emergency kit, still tantalizingly out of reach. If she could just get to it, there might be something useful inside. A flare, perhaps, or a radio. But after the orca's aggressive move, Emma was hesitant to get too close, to the water's edge again. She scanned the island, looking for anything long enough to reach the kit. A piece of driftwood caught her eye, wedged between two rocks about halfway across the island. Moving slowly and deliberately, keeping one eye on the circling orcas, Emma made her way to the driftwood. It took some effort to work it free, but finally, she held a makeshift pole about 4 feet long. "Okay," she breathed, turning back towards the emergency kit. "Let's try this again." Emma approached the edge of the island cautiously, her eyes darting between the kit and the orcas. They seemed to have backed off slightly, but she could still see their dorsal fins cutting through the water nearby. Stretching out as far as she dared, Emma extended the driftwood towards the kit. The first attempt fell short. She inched forward slightly, ignoring the voice in her head screaming about how exposed she was. The second try knocked the kit, causing it to shift slightly in the crevice. "Come on," Emma grunted, reaching out even further. The tip of the driftwood caught the strap of the kit, and with a surge of triumph, Emma began to drag it towards her. Suddenly, the water beside her erupted. Emma barely had time to register the massive black and white form launching itself towards her, before she was throwing herself backwards. The orca's jaws clamped down on the driftwood, wrenching it from her grasp with such force that Emma felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. She scrambled away from the edge, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The orca thrashed in the shallows, splintering the driftwood between its powerful teeth before sliding back into deeper water. Emma curled into a ball, pressing her forehead against her knees as she fought to control her breathing. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a physical weight. She was trapped, alone, with no means of communication and no way to defend herself against creatures that seemed intent on harming her. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Emma lifted her head to survey her surroundings. The orcas were still there, their black dorsal fins barely visible in the gathering gloom. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Emma shivered, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. "Help!" she screamed suddenly, her voice cracking with desperation. "Can anybody hear me? Help!" Her cries echoed across the water, met only by the occasional exhalation of the orcas. Emma shouted until her throat was raw, but no help came. As full darkness settled over the ocean, Emma huddled against the largest boulder she could find, trying to shelter from the biting wind. The moon rose, casting an eerie glow over the water. In its pale light, Emma could see the orcas still patrolling, their movements creating phosphorescent trails in the water. The night stretched on endlessly. Emma drifted in and out of a fitful doze, jerking awake at every sound. Each time she opened her eyes, she half expected to see a massive orca looming over her, ready to drag her into the depths. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn, Emma was exhausted, cold, and desperately thirsty. Her lips were cracked, and her tongue felt swollen in her dry mouth. As the sun finally peeked over the horizon, Emma forced herself to stand on shaky legs. She needed to signal for help, to do something other than wait for rescue or death. Her eyes fell on the emergency kit, still lodged in the crevice where she had nearly reached it the day before. It was a risk, but she was out of options. Taking a deep breath, Emma began to edge towards the water, her eyes scanning for any sign of the orcas. They were still there, but seemed less active in the early morning light. She was within arm's reach of the kit when she heard it, the distinctive blow of an orca, much closer than before. Emma froze, her fingers just brushing the edge of the yellow case. Slowly, she turned her head. Rising out of the water no more than 10 feet away was the largest orca she had ever seen. It spy-hopped, lifting its head clear of the water to regard Emma with an eye that seemed to hold an impossible intelligence. For a long moment, neither moved. Emma found herself unable to look away, captivated by the orca's gaze. In that moment, she felt a complex mix of terror and awe, a reminder of why she had dedicated her life to studying these creatures. Then the moment passed. The orca sank beneath the waves, and Emma lunged for the emergency kit, her fingers closing around the strap just as another orca surged forward, its jaws snapping shut inches from her arm. Emma threw herself backwards, clutching the kit to her chest as she scrambled to the center of the island. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. With shaking hands, she opened the kit, praying she would find something, anything, that might help her survive this nightmare. As she rifled through the contents, her fingers closed around a small, cylindrical object, a flare gun. Emma almost sobbed with relief. It wasn't much, but it was hope. As she loaded the flare with trembling fingers, she allowed herself to believe, for the first time since this ordeal began, that she might actually survive. The orcas continued their vigil, their dark eyes watching Emma's every move. But now, clutching the flare gun to her chest, she met their gaze with a newfound determination. Whatever happened next, she wasn't going down without a fight. The flare gun felt heavy in Emma's hands as she scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of a passing ship or aircraft. The morning sun had climbed higher, its warmth doing little to chase away the bone-deep chill that had settled into her body. The orcas continued their relentless patrol, their dorsal fins slicing through the water with an almost hypnotic rhythm. Emma's throat was parched, Her lips cracked and sore. She knew dehydration was becoming a serious concern. "Just one ship," she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's all I need." As if in response to her plea, a dark shape appeared on the horizon. Emma's heart leapt as she squinted, trying to make out what it was. Slowly, agonizingly, it grew larger. A boat. A fishing trawler by the look of it. Without hesitation, Emma raised the flare gun, aiming it high into the sky. She took a deep breath, steadying her shaking hands, and pulled the trigger. The flare shot upward with a hiss, trailing red smoke as it arced across the blue expanse. "Please see it," Emma muttered, her eyes fixed on the distant vessel. "Please, please see it." For a heart-stopping moment, the boat seemed to continue on its course, unaware of her desperate signal. Then miraculously it began to turn, changing direction to head straight for her tiny island. A laugh bubbled up from Emma's chest, equal parts relief and hysteria. "Yes, over here! I'm here!" she shouted, waving her arms frantically despite knowing the boat was still too far away to see her. Her jubilation was short-lived. A massive splash drew her attention back to the water surrounding her rocky refuge. The orcas, which had been relatively calm throughout the morning, were suddenly in a frenzy of activity. They circled faster, their movements becoming increasingly erratic. "No, no, no," Emma breathed, watching in horror as several of the larger orcas positioned themselves between her island and the approaching boat. "What are you doing?" The largest orca, the one Emma had come to think of as the pod's matriarch, spy-hopped again. Its dark eyes seemed to fix on Emma with an almost human-like intelligence. There was something in that gaze that sent a chill down Emma's spine, a calculated look that seemed to say, "You're not going anywhere." The fishing boat was close enough now that Emma could make out figures moving on the deck. She could hear the faint sound of a horn blowing, likely trying to get her attention. "Here, I'm over here," Emma screamed, her voice cracking with the effort. She waved the empty flare gun over her head, hoping the sunlight would glint off its metal surface. One of the fishermen must have spotted her because the boat increased its speed, cutting through the waves with renewed urgency. Emma felt a surge of hope. They were going to make it. They were going to rescue her from this nightmare. But the orcas had other plans. As the boat drew nearer, the pod's behavior became even more aggressive. They began breaching, their massive bodies launching out of the water and crashing back down with tremendous force. The impact sent waves radiating outward, rocking the fishing boat. Emma watched in disbelief as the orcas coordinated their movements, creating a barrier between her and her would-be rescuers. She could see the fishermen on deck pointing and gesturing, clearly as baffled by the orca's behavior as she was. The boat slowed, unable to push through the wall of thrashing cetaceans. Emma's heart sank as she realized the orcas were successfully keeping the vessel at bay. "No!" she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. "Please, you have to try!" But it was becoming clear that any attempt to reach her would put the fishermen in serious danger. The orcas were breaching dangerously close to the boat now, their massive bodies threatening to crash down on the deck. Emma watched in despair as the fishing boat began to back away, retreating from the aggressive pod. She wanted to scream, to beg them not to leave her, but she knew they had no choice. They couldn't risk their lives against creatures as powerful as orcas. As the boat disappeared back over the horizon, Emma sank to her knees, a sob tearing from her throat. Her one chance at rescue, thwarted by the very animals she had dedicated her life to studying. "Why?" she cried, looking out at the now calming pod. "Why are you doing this?" The orcas offered no answer, returning to their steady circling of the island. Emma buried her face in her hands, allowing herself a moment of complete despair. When she finally looked up, wiping the tears from her salt-stung eyes, she was struck by a chilling realization. The orca's behavior wasn't random. It wasn't simple aggression or territorial defense. They were keeping her here, deliberately preventing her rescue. But for what purpose? As this thought took hold, Emma felt a paradigm shift in her understanding of the situation. She wasn't dealing with simple animals acting on instinct. These orcas were displaying a level of coordinated, purposeful behavior that went beyond anything recorded in scientific literature. "What do you want from me?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't expect an answer, of course, but giving voice to the question helped her focus her racing thoughts. The largest orca, the matriarch, chose that moment to surface, near the edge of the island. It spy-hopped again, rising high enough out of the water that its eye was level with Emma's. For a long moment they regarded each other. In that orca's gaze, Emma saw something that both terrified and fascinated her. There was an intelligence there, yes, but also something else. Curiosity, perhaps? Or was it challenge? The orca sank, back into the water, but the impact of that moment lingered. Emma's scientific mind, which had been overwhelmed by fear and survival instinct, began to reassert itself. She was in an unprecedented situation, witnessing orca behavior that defied all previous understanding. Despite the danger, the researcher in her couldn't help but be intrigued. "Okay," Emma said, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Okay. Let's approach this logically. What do we know?" She began to list the facts out loud, the sound of her own voice bringing a small measure of comfort in the isolation. 1. This pod is displaying coordinated behavior to keep me isolated. 2. They're actively preventing rescue attempts. 3. Despite multiple opportunities, they haven't actually harmed me. Yet. This last point gave Emma pause. It was true. For all their aggressive displays, the orcas hadn't made a concerted effort to attack her. Even when she had reached for the emergency kit, the orca had snapped at her arm but hadn't made contact. Was it possible they were trying to intimidate rather than injure? But why? Emma mused, her brow furrowed in concentration. What could they possibly gain from keeping me here? As she pondered this, her eyes fell on the remains of her research equipment, still tangled in the wreckage of her kayak that had washed up on the far side of the island. An idea began to form, so outlandish that Emma almost dismissed it immediately. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's impossible. They couldn't possibly," but the more she thought about it, the more it seemed to fit. The orca's behavior, their apparent intelligence, their focus on keeping her isolated but unharmed. It was as if they were creating a controlled environment. Like an experiment, Emma breathed, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Are they studying me? The idea was preposterous, flying in the face of everything she thought she knew about orca cognition. And yet, as she looked out at the pod, still maintaining their vigil, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was onto something. If she was right, and it was a big if, then everything about this situation changed. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was engaged in potentially the most important interspecies interaction in history. Emma stood up, her legs shaky, but her resolve firm. She looked out at the orcas, seeing them with new eyes. "All right," she said, her voice gaining strength. "If this is an experiment, then let's experiment. Let's see what we can learn from each other." As if in response to her words, the matriarch orca surfaced again, its blow echoing across the water. Emma met its gaze no longer with fear but with a mix of respect and scientific curiosity. "Okay," she said, addressing the orca directly. "You've got my attention. What's our next move?" The sun climbed higher in the sky, marking the beginning of another day in this extraordinary encounter. Emma had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of excitement cutting through her fear. Whatever these orcas wanted from her, she was determined to understand it. Her survival and potentially a revolutionary scientific discovery depended on it. The sun had reached its zenith, beating down mercilessly on Emma's small rocky refuge. Her throat burned with thirst and her stomach cramped with hunger. Despite her newfound determination to understand the orca's behavior, the harsh reality of her situation was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Emma scanned the horizon once more, hoping against hope to see another boat or perhaps a plane. But there was nothing but endless blue in every direction. She turned her attention back to the orcas, which continued their relentless patrol around the island. "All right," she said, her voice hoarse. "If we're going to do this, we need to establish some ground rules." The largest orca, the one Emma had dubbed the matriarch, surfaced near the edge of the island. Its dark eyes seemed to focus on her with unnerving intensity. Emma took a deep breath, feeling slightly foolish for talking to the orca as if it could understand her, but pressing on nonetheless. I need water. Food. If you're really studying me, you must know I can't survive much longer without them. She paused, half expecting some kind of response. The orca simply continued to watch her, its powerful body barely moving as it held position in the water. Okay, let's try something else, Emma muttered. She cast her gaze around the small island, looking for anything she could use to communicate. Her eyes fell on a collection of smaller rocks near her feet. Slowly, carefully, Emma began to arrange the rocks into a simple pattern, a circle with a line through it. She glanced up at the orca, which had been joined by two others, all watching, her actions with apparent interest. Water, Emma said clearly, pointing to the symbol she had created. This means water. I need water to survive. The orcas remained motionless, their eyes fixed on Emma and her crude rock drawing. For a long moment, nothing happened. Emma felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. What had she expected? That they would suddenly produce a bottle of fresh water? But then, something extraordinary happened. The matriarch orca dove beneath the surface, its massive tail fluke sending up a spray of water. The other two followed suit. Emma watched, her heart racing, as the pod began to move in a coordinated pattern. To her astonishment, they were recreating her symbol in the water. The orcas swam in a perfect circle, then one cut straight through the middle, leaving a trail of disturbed water that mimicked the line in Emma's rock drawing. Oh my God, Emma breathed, her scientific mind reeling at the implications. This wasn't just mimicry, this was communication. Excited now, Emma quickly created another symbol, a simple stick figure. Human, she said loudly, pointing to herself and then to the drawing. This means human, me. Again, the orcas watched intently. This time, their response came faster. Two of the smaller orcas positioned themselves vertically in the water, their bodies forming the legs of the stick figure. The matriarch then breached, its body arcing over the top to complete the representation. Emma let out a laugh that was part joy, part disbelief. This is incredible, she said, her earlier despair momentarily forgotten in the face of this unprecedented breakthrough. Over the next few hours, Emma continued to create simple symbols, each time explaining their meaning. The orcas, for their part, consistently found ways to recreate these symbols in the water. It was clear that they weren't just mimicking her actions. They were actively engaging in a form of symbolic communication. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, Emma sat back, her mind whirling with the implications of what she had witnessed. She had just engaged in two-way communication with another species. The scientific community would be stunned, if she ever got the chance to tell them about it. This thought brought her crashing back to the reality of her situation. Despite the incredible breakthrough, she was still stranded on a tiny island with no food, no water, and no rescue in sight. Look, Emma said, her voice cracking with exhaustion and dehydration. This has been amazing, truly revolutionary. But I can't keep this up much longer. I need help. Real, tangible help. The matriarch orca surfaced again, closer this time than it had ever come before. Its eye, intelligent and inscrutable, seemed to bore into Emma's very soul. Then, without warning, it opened its mouth. Emma instinctively flinched back, years of ingrained caution overriding her recent experiences. But the orca wasn't attacking. Instead, a small silver fish slid from its mouth, landing on the rocks at Emma's feet. Emma stared at the fish in disbelief. It was a herring, still alive and flopping weakly on the stone. She looked back at the orca, which continued to watch her expectantly. Is this for me? Emma asked, knowing how ridiculous the question sounded even as she voiced it. The orca made a soft clicking sound, nudging its massive head towards the fish as if encouraging her. Emma's stomach clenched painfully, a reminder of how long it had been since she'd eaten. Raw fish wasn't exactly appealing, but she was in no position to be picky. With shaking hands, she picked up the herring. Thank you, she said, meeting the orca's gaze. Then, steeling herself, she bit into the fish. The taste was overwhelming, briny and intensely fishy. Emma gagged slightly but forced herself to keep eating. As unpleasant as it was, the fish was providing much-needed protein and moisture. As she finished the last bite, Emma noticed more orcas surfacing nearby. To her amazement, each of them had a fish in its mouth. One by one, they deposited their offerings on the edge of the island. "You're feeding me," Emma said, a lump forming in her throat that had nothing to do with the raw fish. The gesture was so unexpected, so bizarrely considerate, that she felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Over the next hour, Emma ate as much as she could stomach, knowing she needed to keep up her strength. The orcas watched her intently, occasionally making soft vocalizations to each other. As night began to fall, Emma curled up against the largest boulder on the island, her belly full of fish but her mind racing. She had witnessed something today that defied explanation, a level of intelligence and empathy in these orcas that went far beyond anything recorded in scientific literature. "Why me?" she murmured, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion. "Why are you showing me all this?" As if in answer, the matriarch orca surfaced once more. In the fading light, Emma could just make out something clutched gently in its mouth. The orca moved closer to the island and carefully deposited the object on a flat rock near the water's edge. Emma crawled forward, her curiosity overcoming her fatigue. As she reached the rock, her breath caught in her throat. There, gleaming wetly in the moonlight, was her waterproof camera, the one she had lost when her kayak capsized. With trembling hands, Emma picked up the camera. Miraculously, it seemed undamaged. She turned it on, and to her amazement, it powered up. You want me to record this?" Emma said, realization dawning. "You're not just studying me. You're trying to communicate through me." The orca made a soft trilling sound that Emma could have sworn sounded like affirmation. As the full moon rose over the Pacific, casting a silvery glow over the water, Emma found herself facing a pod of orcas with a camera in her hand and a head full of questions. She was cold, exhausted, and still very much in danger. But she was also on the cusp of something monumental, a breakthrough that could change humanity's understanding of cetacean intelligence forever. "Okay," Emma said, raising the camera. "Let's see what you want to show me." The orcas began to move, their sleek bodies cutting through the moonlit water with graceful precision. As Emma watched through her camera's viewfinder, she realized they were forming patterns, complex, interlocking shapes that seemed to pulse and shift with a rhythm all their own. It was beautiful, mysterious, and utterly alien. Emma kept filming, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Was this a form of communication? A display of some kind? Or something else entirely, beyond her current capacity to understand? As the night wore on, Emma continued to document the orcas' strange behaviors, her earlier fear and desperation giving way to a sense of wonder and privilege. Whatever the outcome of this ordeal, she knew she was witnessing something unprecedented in the history of human-animal interaction. With the camera clutched tightly in her hands, Emma settled in for another long night on her rocky island. But this time, instead of fear, she felt a glimmer of hope. These incredible creatures were trying to tell her something. All she had to do was figure out how to listen. The first light of dawn found Emma hunched over her camera, her eyes bloodshot from a night of constant observation. She had barely slept, too entranced by the complex behaviors the orcas had been displaying. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, and her body ached from the unyielding rock beneath her. But her mind was alive with possibilities. "This is Dr. Emma Foster, marine biologist, current date unknown." She spoke into the camera's microphone, her voice hoarse from dehydration and overuse. "I'm stranded on a small island off the coast of British Columbia, surrounded by a pod of orcas exhibiting unprecedented behaviors. They've been communicating with me, for lack of a better term." Emma panned the camera across the water where the orcas continued their mesmerizing aquatic dance. "They've demonstrated an understanding of symbolic representation, intentional food sharing, and what appears to be a form of collective movement-based communication. The implications of this are staggering." She lowered the camera, rubbing her eyes with her free hand. The lack of sleep and proper nutrition was starting to take its toll. Despite the orcas' offerings of fish, Emma knew she was in a precarious Situation. Dehydration was becoming a serious concern and exposure to the elements was wearing her down. I need to find a way off this island, Emma muttered to herself, scanning the horizon for any sign of boats or aircraft. But as before, there was nothing but open ocean as far as the eye could see. A loud splash drew her attention back to the water. The matriarch orca had surfaced close to the island, its massive body gleaming in the morning sun. Emma noticed something different in its behavior, a sense of urgency that hadn't been present before. "What is it?" Emma asked, instinctively addressing the orca as she would a research colleague. "Are you trying to tell me something?" The orca responded, with a series of clicks and whistles, more vocally active than it had been throughout the ordeal. It then dove beneath the surface only to reappear moments later a few yards further out. It repeated this action, each time resurfacing slightly farther from the island. Emma's brow furrowed as she tried to decipher the orca's behavior. "Do you want me to follow you?" As if in response, the orca breached, its enormous body clearing the water entirely before crashing back down with a thunderous splash. The other members of the pod began to vocalize excitedly, creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and haunting calls. Emma's heart raced as she considered her options. Following the orcas into open water was incredibly risky. She had no boat, no life jacket, and was already weakened from her time on the island. But staying put offered little hope of rescue, and her situation was growing more desperate by the hour. "I can't believe I'm even considering this," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly as she addressed the camera again. "But these orcas have shown a level of intelligence and seeming concern for my welfare that defies everything we thought we knew about cetacean cognition. If they're trying to lead me somewhere, I think I have to trust them." With trembling hands, Emma secured the camera to her belt using a strip torn from her shirt. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. "If anyone finds this footage," she spoke into the camera one last time, "please make sure it gets to the Cetacean Research Institute in Vancouver. What I've witnessed here could revolutionize our understanding of orca intelligence." Emma stepped to the edge of the small island, the water lapping at her feet. The matriarch orca had moved closer again, its massive body creating a small wake as it treaded water just offshore. "Okay," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trusting you. Please don't let me down." With a final deep breath, Emma plunged into the frigid Pacific waters. The cold hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. She gasped, struggling to keep her head above water as her body adjusted to the shock. To her amazement, the matriarch orca glided up beside her, presenting its dorsal fin. Emma hesitated for just a moment before grasping it, her fingers finding purchase on the slick surface. "This is insane," Emma muttered through chattering teeth. But as the orca began to move, pulling her gently through the water, she felt a surge of exhilaration. She was experiencing something no human had ever documented before, a voluntary cooperative interaction with a wild orca. The rest of the pod fell into formation around them, their bodies creating a protective barrier against the open ocean. Emma marveled at their coordination, the way they seemed to anticipate each other's movements with effortless grace. As they swam, Emma tried to keep track of their direction, but the featureless expanse of the ocean soon had her disoriented. She could only trust that the orcas knew where they were going. Hours passed, marked by the rhythmic sound of the orcas breathing and the steady movement through the water. Despite the cold, Emma found herself slipping into an almost meditative state, lulled by the gentle motion and the strange sense of safety she felt in the presence of these enormous predators. Just as Emma's strength was beginning to falter, her muscles burning from the effort of holding onto the orca's fin, she heard a sound that made her heart leap. The distant drone of an engine. "Do you hear that?" she called out, not expecting a response but unable to contain her excitement. The orca's vocalizations increased, as if they too recognized the significance of the sound. As they crested a large wave, Emma saw it, a coast guard vessel, its white hull gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was still a fair distance away, but it was undeniably headed in their direction. "They found us," Emma breathed, scarcely able to believe it. But how? The answer came as she watched the orca's behavior. They had begun to breach more frequently, their massive bodies launching out of the water in spectacular displays. It was a performance impossible to miss, even from a great distance. You led them to us, Emma realized, a lump forming in her throat. You've been guiding them to me this whole time. The Coast Guard vessel drew closer, and Emma could now make out figures on the deck pointing in her direction. A loudspeaker crackled to life, its message distorted by distance but unmistakably human. As they neared the ship, the matriarch, Orca, slowed its pace. Emma reluctantly let go of its fin, treading water as she waited for rescue. The pod circled around her, keeping her safe in their midst until a small rescue boat was launched from the larger vessel. "Ma'am, are you Dr. Foster?" A Coast Guard officer called out as they approached. "Yes," Emma shouted back, her voice cracking with emotion. "Yes, I'm Dr. Foster." As the rescue boat drew alongside her, Emma felt conflicting emotions surging through her. Relief at her impending rescue warred with a profound sense of loss. She turned in the water, seeking out the matriarch Orca one last time. It surfaced nearby, its intelligent eye meeting Emma's gaze. In that moment, a wordless understanding passed between them. Whatever had transpired over the past few days, whatever the Orca's motivations had been, it was over now. "Thank you," Emma said softly, blinking back tears as she was helped into the rescue boat. "For everything." The matriarch Orca breached one final time, its massive body silhouetted against the setting sun. Then, with a flick of its powerful flukes, it dove beneath the waves, the rest of the pod following suit. As the rescue boat sped back to the coast guard vessel, Emma clutched her camera tightly. She knew that what she had experienced would be met with skepticism, perhaps even disbelief. But she had the footage, and more importantly, she had the memory of those incredible days etched indelibly in her mind. Emma Foster had set out to study orcas, to unravel the mysteries of their behavior. Instead, they had studied her, and in doing so, had opened up a world of possibilities she had never imagined. As the orcas disappeared into the depths of the Pacific, Emma knew that her work, their work, was just beginning. The Coast Guard vessel cut through the waves, its powerful engines thrumming beneath Emma's feet as she stood on the deck, wrapped in a thick blanket. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, searching for any sign of the pod that had been her constant companions for the past few days. But the orcas were gone, vanished into the vast expanse of the Pacific as quickly as they had appeared. "Dr. Foster?" a voice called, breaking through her reverie. Emma turned to see a young Coast Guard officer approaching, a steaming mug in his hands. "I thought you might like some tea. It'll help warm you up." Emma accepted the mug gratefully, her hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around the warm ceramic. "Thank you," she said, her voice still hoarse from days of exposure to the elements. She took a sip, the hot liquid soothing her parched throat. "I don't suppose you have any idea how long I was out there?" The officer nodded, consulting a small notebook. "According to our records, you were reported missing 5 days ago, when you failed to return from a solo research expedition. Your research assistant, a Mr. Mike Thompson, raised the alarm. 5 days." Emma could scarcely believe it. The time on the island with the orcas had seemed both eternal and fleeting, a surreal experience that defied normal perceptions of time. "We've been searching for you ever since," the officer continued. "But I have to say, Dr. Foster, we've never seen anything like what we encountered today. Those orcas, they seem to be protecting you, guiding you even. In all my years on these waters, I've never witnessed behavior like that from wild orcas." Emma managed a small smile. "Neither had I until now. They saved my life, you know. More than once." The officer's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You'll have quite a story to tell when we get back to shore. Speaking of which, we should be arriving at the Vancouver harbor in about an hour. There's a medical team standing by to check you over, and I believe some of your colleagues from the Cetacean Research Institute are waiting as well." Emma nodded, a mix of emotions washing over her. Part of her was eager to share her incredible experience, to show the world the footage she had captured, but another part of her felt strangely protective of the orcas and the profound connection she had formed with them. How could she possibly convey the depth of what she had experienced? As the coast of British Columbia came into view, Emma retreated to a quiet corner of the deck. She pulled out her camera, miraculously still functional, despite its ocean journey. With shaking hands, she began to review the footage. There it was, irrefutable evidence of the orca's extraordinary behavior. The symbolic communication, the coordinated movements, the intentional feeding. Emma's heart raced as she watched, realizing the full implications of what she had captured. This wasn't just a personal experience. It was a scientific breakthrough that could reshape our understanding of cetacean intelligence. The harbor came into view, and Emma could see a small crowd gathered on the dock. As the ship drew closer, she recognized familiar faces. Her research team, university colleagues, and was that a news crew? Emma's stomach tightened. She wasn't ready for this, wasn't prepared to share her experience with the world just yet. She needed time to process, to analyze the data objectively, before presenting it to the scientific community. As the ship docked, Emma braced herself for the onslaught of questions she knew was coming. The moment she stepped onto solid ground, she was engulfed in a flurry of activity. Emma, thank God you're all right. It was Mike, her research assistant, pushing through the crowd to reach her. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days, dark circles prominent under his eyes. Mike, Emma said, managing a weak smile as he enveloped her in a hug. I'm okay. I'm sorry for worrying everyone. Before Mike could respond, they were surrounded by a swarm of reporters, cameras flashing and microphones thrust towards Emma's face. Dr. Foster, can you tell us what happened out there? Is it true you were rescued by a pod of killer whales? Do you have any evidence to support your claims? The questions came rapid fire, overwhelming Emma's already taxed senses. She felt her breath quickening, her vision narrowing as the crowd pressed closer. Please, she managed to say, her voice barely audible above the clamor. I need some time. I'm not ready to make any statements yet. A firm hand grasped her elbow, and Emma turned to see Dr. Larson, the head of the Cetacean Research Institute, at her side. His familiar presence was a lifeline in the chaos. That's enough, Doctor, Larson said, his authoritative voice cutting through the noise. Dr. Foster has been through a traumatic experience and needs medical attention. We'll hold a press conference when she's ready and not a moment before. Now please, give her some space. With that, Dr. Larson guided Emma through the crowd, Mike following close behind. They made their way to a waiting ambulance where a team of paramedics was standing by. As Emma was helped onto a gurney, Dr. Larson leaned in close. We'll talk soon, Emma. Take care of yourself first. Whatever happened out there, we'll figure it out together. Emma nodded gratefully, allowing herself to be loaded into the ambulance. As the doors closed, muffling the sounds of the crowd outside, she finally let out a long, shaky breath. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, IV fluids, and concerned faces. Emma answered questions mechanically, her mind still out on the water with the orcas. She clutched her camera tightly, unwilling to let it out of her sight even as the doctors insisted she rest. It was late evening by the time Emma was cleared to leave the hospital. Dr. Larson had arranged for her to be taken to a quiet hotel rather than her own apartment, knowing she'd need space away from prying eyes. As Emma settled into the hotel room, the events of the past few days finally caught up with her. She sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotions. Relief, exhaustion, exhilaration, and a profound sense of loss. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Emma, it's Dr. Larson, may I come in? Emma hesitated for a moment before calling out, Yes, come in. Dr. Larson entered, his face etched with concern. He pulled up a chair, sitting across from Emma. How are you feeling? Emma managed a weak smile. Physically? I'm fine. A little dehydrated, some minor sunburn. But otherwise, she trailed off, unsure how to articulate the tumult of her thoughts and emotions. Dr. Larson nodded understandingly. And mentally? Emma, what you've been through, it's unprecedented. It's okay if you're feeling overwhelmed. Emma's gaze drifted to the window where she could just make out a sliver of the ocean beyond. I don't even know where to begin, Dr. Larson. What I experienced out there, and it defies everything we thought we knew about orca behavior, about animal intelligence in general. Dr. Larson leaned forward, his eyes alight with scientific curiosity. Tell me, Emma, what exactly did you see? Taking a deep breath, Emma recounted her experience. The orcas' protective behavior, their apparent understanding of symbolic communication, the coordinated movements that seemed to convey complex information. As she spoke, she could see Dr. Larson's expression shifting from concern to amazement. This is extraordinary, Emma, he said when she had finished. If what you're saying is true, and I have no reason to doubt you, this could revolutionize our understanding of cetacean cognition. Emma nodded, reaching for her camera. I have footage, not of everything, but enough to corroborate much of what I've told you. Dr. Larson's eyes widened. May I see? For the next hour, they reviewed the footage together. Dr. Larson watched in stunned silence as the orcas on screen displayed behaviors that went far beyond anything previously documented. Emma, he said finally, his voice hushed with awe, this is Nobel Prize-worthy research. Do you understand the implications of what you've captured here? Emma nodded slowly. I do. And that's what terrifies me, Dr. Larson. The world isn't ready for this. If this gets out before we've had a chance to study it properly to understand what's really happening, can you imagine the consequences? The orcas could be in danger. People might try to replicate my experience, putting themselves and the whales at risk. Dr. Larson sat back, stroking his chin thoughtfully. You're right, of course. We need to approach this carefully, methodically. But Emma, we can't keep this hidden forever. The scientific community deserves to know, and more importantly, the public has a right to understand the true nature of these incredible creatures we share our planet with. Emma stood, pacing the small room as she grappled with the weight of her discovery. I know, but we need time. Time to analyze the footage, to develop proper protocols for further study. We need to protect the orcas while we unravel this mystery. Dr. Larson nodded, standing to join her by the window. I agree. Here's what we'll do. We'll issue a statement saying you were indeed rescued with the help of a pod of orcas, but we'll keep the details vague for now. We'll cite the need for further study before making any definitive claims. Meanwhile, we'll assemble a small team, only our most trusted colleagues, to begin analyzing your footage and data. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thank you, Dr. Larson. I think that's the best approach. As Dr. Larson prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Emma, what you've experienced. It's the kind of discovery scientists dream of their entire careers. Take some time to rest, to process. But know that when you're ready, we have work to do. Important work. After he left, Emma returned to the window. The moon had risen, casting a silvery path across the water. Somewhere out there, the orcas were swimming, living their lives unaware of the profound impact they had made on human understanding. Emma pressed her hand against the cool glass, a sense of purpose settling over her. She had been given a gift, a glimpse into a world of intelligence and complexity that humans had only begun to comprehend. Now, it was her responsibility to bridge that gap, to foster understanding between species in a way never before possible. As she gazed out at the moonlit ocean, Emma made a silent promise, to the orcas, to science, and to herself. She would unravel this mystery no matter how long it took, and in doing so, she would change the way humans saw their place in the natural world forever. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Emma awoke, her body still attuned to the rhythms of her days on the island. For a moment she felt disoriented, the softness of the hotel bed foreign after nights spent on unyielding rock. Then reality came rushing back, bringing with it a flood of emotions and responsibilities. Emma sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. Her muscles ached, a reminder of her ordeal, but her mind was clear and focused. She knew what she had to do. Reaching for her phone, she dialed a familiar number. It rang twice before a groggy voice answered. Hello? Mike, it's Emma, I need your help. There was a rustling sound, then Mike's voice came through clearer. Emma, are you okay? It's 5:30 in the morning. I'm fine, Emma assured him, but we need to get to work. Can you meet me at the institute in an hour? And bring your laptop. We've got a lot of data to go through. Mike's response was immediate. Of course, I'll be there. An hour later, Emma stood outside the Cetacean Research Institute, a travel mug of strong coffee in hand. The building was quiet, most of the staff not due in for hours yet. It was exactly what Emma needed: space to think, to analyze without interruption. Mike arrived moments later looking rumpled but alert. "Hey," he said, giving Emma a quick hug. "How are you holding up?" Emma managed a small smile. "Better than I probably should be. Come on, let's get inside, we've got work to do." In Emma's office, they set up their laptops side by side. Emma pulled out her camera, connecting it to download the footage she'd captured. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "What you're about to see, it's going to challenge everything we thought we knew about orca behavior. I need you to approach this with an open mind, but also with rigorous skepticism. We can't afford to let emotion cloud our judgment." Mike nodded solemnly. "You got it, boss. Hit me." For the next several hours, they pored over the footage. Emma narrated each clip, explaining the context and her observations. Mike watched in stunned silence, his eyes growing wider with each passing minute. Emma, this is incredible," he breathed as they reviewed a sequence showing the Orcas' apparent symbolic communication. "If this is real, and I'm not doubting you, but it's just so extraordinary. It changes everything we thought we knew about cetacean cognition." Emma nodded, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursing through her. "I know. That's why we need to approach this carefully. We can't rush to conclusions, no matter how tempting it might be." They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, cataloging behaviors, cross-referencing with known orca studies, and developing a preliminary analysis framework. As the day wore on, other researchers began to filter into the building. Curious faces peeked into Emma's office, but a stern look from Mike kept them at bay. It was late afternoon when Dr. Larson knocked on the door. "Emma, do you have a moment?" Emma looked up from her computer, blinking as she refocused on the world beyond her screen. "Of course, Dr. Larson, come in." Dr. Larson entered, his eyes taking in the chaos of notes and diagrams spread across Emma's desk. "I see you've been busy. How's the analysis coming?" Emma ran a hand through her hair, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "It's overwhelming, to be honest. The more we dig into the footage, the more questions we uncover. We're dealing with behaviors so far beyond our current understanding of orca cognition that we're struggling to even categorize them properly." Dr. Larson nodded, his expression a mix of excitement and concern. "I suspected as much. That's actually why I'm here. The board has called an emergency meeting. They want to discuss how to proceed with your findings." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. "So soon, but we've barely scratched the surface of the data." "I know," Dr. Larson said, holding up a hand to forestall her objections. "And I've stressed to them the need for caution and thorough analysis. But Emma, you have to understand, word has gotten out. The scientific community is buzzing with rumors and the media is clamoring for information. We need to decide on a course of action." Emma glanced at Mike, who gave her an encouraging nod. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "All right, when's the meeting?" "In an hour," Dr. Larson replied. "I'd like you to present your initial findings, just the facts as best we understand them so far." "Can you do that?" Emma nodded, already mentally organizing her notes. "I'll be ready." An hour later, Emma stood before the board of directors, her heart pounding but her voice steady as she presented her extraordinary experience and the preliminary analysis of her data. The room was silent as she spoke, the board members leaning forward in their seats, expressions ranging from skepticism to awe. As Emma concluded her presentation, the room erupted in a flurry of questions and exclamations. She fielded them, as best she could, always careful to emphasize the preliminary nature of their findings and the need for further study. Finally, the board chair, Dr. Eleanor Chen, called for order. "Dr. Foster, what you've presented to us today is nothing short of revolutionary. If verified, your findings could redefine our understanding of animal intelligence and our relationship with the natural world. However, we must proceed with the utmost caution." Emma nodded in agreement. "That's been my concern as well, Dr. Chen. We're dealing with behaviors so complex, so far beyond our current understanding that we risk misinterpreting or oversimplifying if we rush to conclusions." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her gaze intense. What would you propose as our next steps, Dr. Foster? Emma took a deep breath, acutely aware that her next words could shape the course of her research, and potentially the future of orca conservation, for years to come. I propose a two-pronged approach, she began. First, we continue our rigorous analysis of the existing data. We need to catalog every behavior, cross-reference it with all known studies, and develop a comprehensive framework for understanding what we're seeing. She paused, gauging the room's reaction before continuing. Second, and this is crucial, we need to attempt to replicate these interactions, not by putting researchers in danger, but by developing safe, controlled methods of studying wild orca pods to see if we can observe similar behaviors. The room buzzed with murmured discussions. Dr. Larson spoke up. And what about the media attention? The scientific community is already asking questions. Emma nodded, having anticipated this. I suggest we release a carefully worded statement. We acknowledge the unusual nature of my rescue and the observed orca behaviors, but stress that we're in the early stages of analysis. We invite collaboration from other research institutions, but make it clear that we won't be releasing detailed findings until we've completed a thorough, peer-reviewed study. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. It's a sensible approach, but Dr. Foster, you must understand the pressure we'll be under. The potential implications of your findings, they're enormous. There will be those who want to rush this process, who'll demand immediate access to your data. I understand, Emma said, her voice firm. But we owe it to the scientific process, and to the orcas themselves, to do this right. If we're really on the brink of proving a level of cetacean intelligence, far beyond what we've previously understood, we have a responsibility to approach it with the utmost care and respect. The room fell silent as the board members considered Emma's words. Finally, Dr. Chen spoke. Very well, Dr. Foster. We'll proceed according to your recommendations. But I want weekly progress reports, and at the first sign of reproducible results, we revisit our strategy. Is that clear? Emma nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Perfectly clear, Dr. Chen. Thank you. As the meeting adjourned, Emma felt a mix of relief and anticipation wash over her. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she could scarcely imagine. But she was also filled with a sense of purpose, unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Walking back to her office, Emma paused by a window overlooking the harbor. In the distance, she could see the vast expanse of the Pacific, the water glittering in the late afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, the orcas were swimming, living their complex lives, perhaps even now engaging in behaviors that would reshape humanity's understanding of intelligence. Emma pressed her hand against the cool glass, a small smile playing on her lips. I'll figure it out, she whispered, a promise to herself and to the extraordinary creatures that had changed her life. Forever. Whatever you're trying to tell us, I'll find a way to understand. With renewed determination, Emma turned away from the window and headed back to her office. There was work to be done, a mystery to unravel, and a bridge to build between two worlds. And Emma Foster was ready for the challenge. The weeks following Emma's return blurred into a whirlwind of intense research, sleepless nights, and heated debates. The Cetacean Research Institute had become a hive of activity, with Emma at the center of it all. Her office, once a neat and orderly space, now resembled an academic war room. Walls covered in charts, graphs, and sticky notes filled with scribbled observations. Emma sat at her desk, rubbing her tired eyes as she pored over the latest data analysis. The soft glow of her computer screen illuminated the dark circles under her eyes, a testament to the long hours she'd been putting in. A knock at the door broke her concentration. "Come in," she called, not looking up from her screen. Mike entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said, placing 1 cup on Emma's desk. "How's it going?" Emma leaned back in, her chair stretching her stiff muscles. "Slowly," she admitted, taking a grateful sip of the coffee. "Every time I think we're making progress, we uncover 10 new questions." Mike nodded, pulling up a chair. "That's the nature of groundbreaking research, I suppose. But Emma, you've got to pace yourself. You can't solve all the mysteries of orca cognition in a month." Emma managed a wry smile. "Tell that to the board. They're breathing down my neck for results." "Speaking of which," Mike said, his tone growing serious. "Have you seen the latest news?" Emma's brow furrowed. "No, I've been buried in this data all day." "What's happened?" Mike pulled out his tablet, bringing up a news article. "A group of tourists off the coast of Alaska is claiming they had a close encounter with a pod of orcas. They're saying the whales were trying to communicate with them." Emma's heart sank as she skimmed the article. "Let me guess, they're citing my experience as precedent?" Mike nodded grimly. "It's starting to snowball, Emma. More and more people are trying to seek out orca encounters, thinking they'll experience something similar to what you did." Emma pushed back from her desk, frustration evident in her voice. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. We release one carefully worded statement, and suddenly everyone thinks they're going to have a mystical communion with wild orcas." She stood up, pacing the small office. "Don't they understand how dangerous this is? Not just for the people, but for the orcas. If this keeps up, it's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt. And then what? We'll be facing calls to cull orca populations for public safety." Mike watched her with concern. "What do you want to do?" Emma stopped pacing, her mind racing. "We need to get ahead of this. Set up a press conference. It's time we addressed this directly." The next morning found Emma standing before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing as she approached the podium. Dr. Larson stood beside her, a reassuring presence in the face of the media frenzy. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself before she began to speak. "Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I'm here today to address the recent surge in attempts to initiate close encounters with wild orca populations." She paused, making eye contact with several reporters before continuing. "While I understand the excitement generated by my recent experience, I cannot stress enough how unique and unprecedented that situation was. It is not something that can or should be replicated." A reporter's hand shot up. "Dr. Foster, are you saying that the orcas didn't actually try to communicate with you?" Emma shook her head. "No, that's not what I'm saying. What I experienced was real and it was extraordinary, but it was also dangerous. I was in a life-threatening situation, and the orcas' behavior, while remarkable, was completely unpredictable." Another reporter called out, "But isn't this proof that orcas are more intelligent than we thought? Shouldn't we be trying to communicate with them?" "Orcas are indeed highly intelligent creatures," Emma replied carefully. "But intelligence doesn't equate to a desire for human interaction. These are wild animals, apex predators with their own complex social structures and behaviors. Attempting to force communication or interaction is not only potentially dangerous for humans, but it's also disruptive and potentially harmful to the orcas themselves." She leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgent tone. "We are at a critical juncture in our understanding of cetacean cognition. The worst thing we could do right now is to create a situation where orcas begin to associate humans with food or play. It would irreparably damage our ability to study their natural behaviors, and could lead to tragic consequences for both humans and orcas." The room fell silent for a moment as her words sank in. Then a voice from the back asked, "So what should we do? Just ignore what happened to you?" Emma smiled, sensing an opportunity. "Absolutely not. What we should do is support scientific research. My team at the Cetacean Research Institute is working tirelessly to analyze the data from my experience and to develop safe, non-invasive methods of studying wild orca populations. We're on the brink of potentially revolutionary discoveries about animal cognition, but we need time and resources to do it right." She straightened up, her voice filled with passion. "Instead of trying to recreate a dangerous situation, I urge everyone to channel their excitement and curiosity into supporting marine conservation efforts. Donate to reputable research organizations. Advocate for policies that protect our oceans and the creatures that call them home. That's how we'll truly honor the incredible intelligence and complexity of these magnificent animals." As the press conference concluded, Emma felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. She had done her best to redirect the public's fascination in a more constructive direction, but only time would tell if it would be enough. Back in her office, Emma found Dr. Larson waiting for her. "Well done out there," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "You handled that masterfully." Emma sank into her chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the past weeks. "I just hope it makes a difference." Dr. Larson nodded, his expression thoughtful. It will. But Emma, we need to talk about next steps. The board is impressed with your work so far, but they're pushing for more concrete results. They want to know when we can start testing your communication theories in the field. Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. She had known this was coming, but the reality of it still filled her with apprehension. It's too soon, she said, shaking her head. We're not ready. We need more time to analyze the data to develop proper protocols. I understand your concerns, Dr. Larson said gently. But we can't keep the scientific community at bay forever. If we don't start field testing soon, someone else will beat us to it. And they might not be as careful or ethical in their approach. Emma knew he was right, but the thought of rushing into field tests made her uneasy. She thought back to her time on the island, to the intense and inexplicable connection she had felt with the Orcas. How could they possibly hope to replicate that in a controlled setting? Give me 1 more week, she said finally. 1 more week to refine our protocols and analysis. Then we can start planning for field tests. Dr. Larson nodded, relief evident on his face. All right, 1 week, but Emma, make it count. We're on the verge of something incredible here. Don't let your fears hold us back. As he left, Emma turned to her computer, determination setting in. She had 1 week to crack the code, to find a way to bridge the gap between human and cetacean minds without putting either in danger. It seemed an impossible task, but as she recalled the intelligent gaze of the matriarch Orca, Emma felt a surge of hope. We're close, she murmured, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she dove back into her data. I know we're close. Just a little more time and we'll understand what you were trying to tell us. Outside her window, the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, the Orcas were swimming, living their complex lives, perhaps even now engaging in behaviors that would reshape humanity's understanding of intelligence, and Emma Foster was determined to be the one to unlock their secrets no matter the cost. The gentle hum of the research vessel's engines filled the air as Emma stood on the deck, her eyes scanning the horizon. The Pacific stretched out. Before her, a vast expanse of blue under the early morning sky. It had been 3 months since her extraordinary encounter with the Orcas, and now she was back on the water, ready to put her theories to the test. Any signs yet? Mike called from the ship's bridge. Emma shook her head, not taking her eyes off the water. Nothing yet, but they're out there. I can feel it. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation. After her press conference, Emma had thrown herself into developing a comprehensive protocol for safe, ethical Orca interaction studies. It had been a battle to get approval, but finally, the board had green-lit a series of controlled field tests. Dr. Larson approached, handing Emma a steaming mug of coffee. How are you feeling? Emma took a sip, grateful for the warmth. Nervous, excited, terrified, she admitted with a small laugh. What if we can't replicate it, Anders? What if what happened to me was just a fluke? Dr. Larson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then we learn from it and try again. Science is built on trial and error, Emma. You know that better than anyone. Emma nodded, taking comfort in his words. She was about to respond when a shout from the crow's nest caught her attention. Orcas off the port bow. In an instant, the ship burst into activity. Researchers rushed to their stations, cameras and hydrophones at the ready. Emma's heart raced as she raised her binoculars, scanning the area where the lookout had pointed. There they were, a pod of orcas, their distinctive black and white bodies breaking the surface as they moved through the water. Emma counted at least 6 individuals, including a large male with a towering dorsal fin. It's not the same pod, Emma murmured, a mix of disappointment and excitement in her voice. But that's okay. This is what we're here for. Dr. Larson nodded, already coordinating the research team. All right, people, let's do this by the book. No one enters the water. We observe from a safe distance and let them approach us if they choose to. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself. This was the moment of truth. Would these orcas display any of the extraordinary behaviors she had witnessed? Or would they simply ignore the boat, going about their business as wild animals typically do? For the next hour, the ship followed the pod at a respectful distance. The orcas seemed aware of their presence but showed no unusual interest. Emma watched intently, documenting every movement, every vocalization. "They're not doing anything out of the ordinary," Mike said, a note of disappointment in his voice. Emma shook her head. "No, they're not. But that doesn't mean we're not learning. Every interaction, even a non-interaction, gives us data." As the morning wore on, Emma began to feel a creeping sense of doubt. Had she been wrong? Had her experience been nothing more than a desperate hallucination brought on by extreme circumstances? Just as she was about to suggest they try a different location, something changed. The largest male orca suddenly altered course, heading straight for the boat. The rest of the pod followed. "Everyone stay calm," Dr. Larson called out. "Let's see what they do." Emma's heart pounded as the orcas drew closer. They circled the boat once, twice, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed almost choreographed. Then, to everyone's amazement, they began to position themselves in a formation around the boat. "Are they protecting us?" one of the junior researchers asked, her voice filled with awe. Emma shook her head, her mind racing. "No, not protecting. They're containing us like they did with me on the island." The largest male surfaced close to the boat, its eye clearly visible as it regarded the humans on board. Emma felt a jolt of recognition. The intelligence in that gaze was unmistakable. "Dr. Foster," Dr. Larson said quietly, "what do we do now?" Emma took a deep breath, her years of training warring with the intuition born from her extraordinary experience. "We wait," she said finally. "We observe, and we be ready for anything." For the next several hours, the orcas maintained their formation around the boat. They didn't attempt to communicate in the same way they had with Emma, but their behavior was undeniably deliberate. They were keeping the boat in place, occasionally spy-hopping to observe the humans on board. As the sun began to set, Emma felt a growing sense of frustration. They were witnessing something remarkable, yes, but it wasn't the breakthrough she had hoped for. There was still a gap, a missing piece to the puzzle. Suddenly, an idea struck her. "The symbols," she murmured, remembering how she had communicated with the orcas during her ordeal. "Mike, bring me that whiteboard from below deck." Mike rushed to comply, returning moments later with a large whiteboard and markers. Emma quickly drew a simple circle with a line through it, the symbol she had used to represent water. "Lower it over the side," she instructed. "Carefully, let's see if they recognize it." The team worked together to secure the whiteboard and lower it into the water. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, to everyone's astonishment, one of the smaller orcas approached. It studied the symbol, then suddenly dove beneath the surface. "What's it doing?" someone whispered. They didn't have to wait long for an answer. The orca resurfaced a short distance away, then began to swim in a tight circle. Another orca cut across its path, creating a line through the circle. Emma gasped. "They're recreating the symbol, just like before." The deck erupted in excited chatter, researchers scrambling to document what they were seeing. Emma felt a surge of vindication. This was proof, undeniable proof, that the orcas were capable of recognizing and replicating abstract symbols. "Emma," Dr. Larson said, his voice filled with awe, "do you realize what this means?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving the orcas. "It means we've only scratched the surface of their cognitive abilities, and it means—" She paused, the full weight of the realization hitting her. "It means that what happened to me wasn't unique to that pod. This could be a species-wide capability." As night fell, the orcas finally broke their formation, disappearing into the darkness with a series of haunting calls. The research team was abuzz with excitement, already planning their next steps. Emma stood at the rail long after the others had gone below deck, her mind whirling with the implications of what they had witnessed. They had made a breakthrough, yes, but she knew it was only the beginning. There was still so much to learn, so many questions to answer. Dr. Larson joined her, handing her a mug of hot tea. "You should get some rest, Emma. It's been a long day." She nodded, taking a sip of the tea. "I will. I can't believe we did it, Anders. We actually did it." He smiled, pride evident in his voice. "You did it, Emma. Your experience, your intuition had led us here. This is just the beginning of something extraordinary." As they stood there, looking out over the moonlit water, Emma felt a profound sense of connection to the unseen orcas swimming in the depths below. They had reached out across the species barrier, offering a glimpse of their intelligence and complexity. Now it was up to her and her team to bridge that gap, to forge a new understanding between humans and these remarkable creatures. Tomorrow, Emma said softly, we try again. And we keep trying until we understand. Dr. Larson nodded, raising his own mug in a small toast. To understanding, he said. Emma clinked her mug against his. To understanding, she echoed, her voice filled with determination and hope for the discoveries that lay ahead. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over the Vancouver harbor as Emma made her way down the dock. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one a reminder of how far she had come, and how far she still had to go. It had been a year since her extraordinary encounter with the orcas, a year filled with breakthroughs, setbacks, and countless hours of research. As she approached the Cetacean Research Institute, Emma paused, taking in the familiar sight of the building she had come to think of as a second home. The past months had transformed it from a quiet academic facility into a hub of cutting-edge research, with scientists from around the world clamoring to be part of what many were calling the greatest leap forward in animal cognition studies in decades. "Morning, Dr. Foster," called out a cheerful voice. Emma turned to see Sarah, one of the graduate students who had joined the project, jogging to catch up with her. "Good morning, Sarah," Emma replied with a smile. "You're here early?" Sarah nodded eagerly. "Couldn't sleep. Today's the big day, isn't it? The symposium?" Emma felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "That it is. Are you ready?" "As I'll ever be," Sarah said with a nervous laugh. "But Dr. Foster, I wanted to ask, do you really think we're ready to present our findings to the international community? There's still so much we don't understand." Emma placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Science is always a work in progress, Sarah. We've made incredible strides, but you're right. There's still a lot we don't know. That's why this symposium is so important. We need fresh perspectives, new ideas to help us push forward." As they entered the building, Emma was struck by the buzz of activity. Researchers hurried back and forth, making last-minute preparations for the day ahead. The air was thick with anticipation and nervous energy. Dr. Larson met them in the lobby, his usually calm demeanor betraying a hint of excitement. "Emma, there you are. We've got a full house already. Representatives from every major marine research institute in the world, plus a few government officials I wasn't expecting." Emma nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Any word from the Haida delegation?" "They arrived last night," Dr. Larson confirmed. "They're eager to share their traditional knowledge about orca behavior. I think their perspective could be invaluable." As they made their way to the main auditorium, Emma's mind wandered back to the months of intensive research that had led to this day. The breakthroughs had been exhilarating. They had successfully replicated the symbolic communication she had experienced, documenting complex interactions between humans and orcas that defied conventional understanding of cetacean cognition. But with each discovery came new questions, new mysteries to unravel. The orcas seemed capable of abstract thought, of problem-solving that rivaled that of great apes. Yet there was still a barrier, a gap in understanding that Emma and her team had yet to bridge. The auditorium was packed, a sea of eager faces turning towards Emma as she took the stage. She gazed out at the audience, recognizing some of the most prominent names in marine biology and animal cognition studies. "Good morning," Emma began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "A year ago I stood before many of you and shared an experience that sounded more like science fiction than scientific fact. Today I'm here to present evidence that not only confirms the extraordinary nature of that encounter, but pushes the boundaries of what we thought we knew about non-human intelligence." For the next hour, Emma led the audience through their findings. She presented video footage of orcas engaging in complex problem-solving tasks, audio recordings of vocalizations that seemed to follow syntactic patterns, and data that suggested a level of self-awareness previously unrecognized in cetaceans. "But perhaps most intriguingly," Emma said, nearing the end of her presentation, "we've documented what appears to be intentional, symbolic communication between orcas and humans. This goes beyond mimicry or conditioned response. We're seeing evidence of abstract thought, of a desire to bridge the communication gap between our species. A murmur ran through the audience. Emma could see a mix of excitement and skepticism on the faces before her. "Dr. Foster?" called out a voice from the back of the room. Emma recognized Dr. Yamamoto, a prominent cetacean biologist from Japan. "While your findings are certainly intriguing, how can we be sure that we're not simply projecting our own desires for communication onto these animals? Couldn't these behaviors be explained by more conventional means?" Emma nodded, having anticipated this question. "It's a valid concern, Dr. Yamamoto, and one we've grappled with throughout our research, but the consistency and complexity of the behaviors we've observed go far beyond what can be explained by conventional models of animal behavior. We've implemented rigorous controls and blind studies to minimize the risk of observer bias." She paused, then continued with passion in her voice. "But more than that, we've had to expand our very conception of what intelligence looks like. We've been limited by an anthropocentric view of cognition. The orcas aren't thinking like humans. They're thinking like orcas. And it's our job to learn their language, not expect them to learn ours." The discussion continued, with researchers from around the world offering insights, challenging assumptions, and proposing new avenues of study. As the symposium broke for lunch, Emma felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had presented. Their findings laid bare the extent of their knowledge and the depth of the remaining mysteries. Now it was time to collaborate, to pool the collective wisdom of the scientific community to push their understanding further. As Emma made her way to the reception area, she was stopped by an elderly woman in traditional Haida regalia. "Dr. Foster," the woman said, her eyes twinkling with a mix of wisdom and amusement. "I am Elder Mara of the Haida Nation. I listened to your presentation with great interest." Emma shook her hand, feeling a sense of reverence for the knowledge this woman must possess. "It's an honor to meet you, Elder Mara. I'm very interested in hearing your perspective on our findings." Mara smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Your science has finally caught up to what our people have known for generations. The orcas are not just animals. They are people of the sea, with minds as rich and complex as our own. But tell me, Dr. Foster, in all your studies, have you learned to listen with more than just your ears?" Emma furrowed her brow, intrigued by the question. "What do you mean?" "The orcas speak not just with sound but with their whole beings. Their movements, their presence. It's all part of their language. To truly understand them, you must learn to listen with your entire self." As Emma pondered these words, she felt a sudden shift in her perspective. Had they been too focused on quantifiable data, on replicable experiments? Was there a deeper level of communication they were missing? The rest of the day passed in a blur of discussions, debates, and new ideas. As the symposium drew to a close, Emma found herself standing once again at the podium, tasked with summarizing the day's events. "We've made incredible progress," she began, looking out at the tired but energized faces of her colleagues. "But today has shown us just how much we still have to learn. The orcas have opened a door for us, offering a glimpse into a form of intelligence so alien, yet so familiar. Our challenge now is to step through that door with open minds and open hearts." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. "This isn't just about understanding orcas. It's about expanding our conception of what intelligence can be, about recognizing the rich mental lives of the creatures we share this planet with. As we move forward, let us remember that we are not just observers of nature, but participants in a complex web of consciousness that spans species and ecosystems." As applause filled the auditorium, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she could scarcely imagine. But she was no longer alone on this journey. With the collective wisdom of the scientific community and the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples, they had a chance to unlock the secrets of cetacean cognition and reshape humanity's relationship with the natural world. Emma's gaze drifted to the window, where she could just make out the distant shimmer of the Pacific. Somewhere out there, the orcas were swimming, living their complex lives, perhaps even now engaging in thoughts and behaviors beyond human comprehension. But Emma Foster was determined to bridge that gap, to forge a connection between species that would change the world forever. As the symposium ended and colleagues began to file out, Emma remained at the podium, her mind already racing with new ideas and experiments. The journey that had begun with her extraordinary encounter, year ago, was far from over. In fact, she realized with a mix of excitement and trepidation it was only just beginning.